We continue with our look at America with a group of familiar faces to our Face the Nation viewers. Journalist Michele Norris heads up the Race Card Project and works with the Aspen Institute. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Michael Gerson is a columnist for The Washington Post. And David Frum is a senior editor at The Atlantic. Jeffrey, I'm going to start with you. I want all of you to take this assignment, but I'm going to start with you because it's your job, Jeffrey. I want
what
you
did
to.
I do wrong?
Yeah. Well, in the new year, we want to target you with this question, which is: you are an assignment editor, and you have to assign coverage for the year 2017. How do you deploy your forces? What's the story?
Well, the story is there's one overarchingly huge story, a very bigly story, as Michele might say. The story is the story is the upending of American politics. The story is of the outs coming in and the ins going out. The story is trying to explain to the American people what's happened to their two main parties. And the deeper story also, I don't want to forget this, the deeper story is globalization and technological disruption and anxiety born of rapid change, rapid destabilizing change, the fragility of institutions. All of that is there undergirding the larger, more immediate story, which is how did Donald Trump become president of the United States, and what does it mean for not only the way America understands itself, but the way the world understands America. I mean, I would just add one more point, which is that the rest of the world is watching with bated breath, because we're at a hinge moment in history. Since 1945, we have played a certain role in the world, and it's not entirely clear that after January 20th, we're going to play that same role.
It should make you an editor. Michele, what's your...
Well, I think it's interesting that at the end of the year, Merriam-Webster told us that they chose the word surreal as the word of the year for 2016 because it describes so much of what we're seeing right now. I want to pick up on one of the things that Jeffrey said about the technological disruption. In this country, we've always assumed that technology was a good thing. We embraced it. We assumed that it was propelling us forward and that it would, perhaps even though it was displacing jobs, that it would make for a better society, a better flow of information. I think we're going to start to really question that now. On a lot of levels, because of what it's done to democracy, because certainly what it's done to the level of American discourse. And as journalists, you know, we have to learn how to operate in a world where there is no longer a common set of facts. People get their news in such a way that it usually affirms or confirms everything that they already believe. We have someone who is about to occupy the Oval Office who is dismissing many of the publications that we work or have worked for, and is trying to bypass us and go directly to people. So as we try to explain this surreal universe, we find ourselves in almost a room of funhouse mirrors, trying to figure out how to describe what's going on.
David?
A neo-fascist party may win the presidency of France this year. Democratic institutions in the countries liberated in 1989 are falling apart in Hungary and Poland and other places, Croatia, elsewhere. The European Union is cracking apart, and the United States has a new president-to-be who has made it clear he's not going to be bound by traditional rules against corruption, traditional rules against foreign influence, traditional rules in just about any way, traditional rules against the president having his own private bodyguard paid for by himself rather than by the state. We are living through a crisis of democracy not unlike anything seen since the Second World War. So that's the story, and it's not an American story, it's a global story. It's a story of American non-exceptionalism, because what is going on in the United States is happening elsewhere, and it's a story about globalization coming home, because it's hard. Americans are used to, as the world's strongest power, being the country that influences others. The idea that a foreign power has reached into the United States and tampered with American democracy and maybe chosen for Americans a president that the larger number of Americans didn't want for themselves.
Russia, in this case, is it?
That's an experience that other countries, weaker countries, smaller countries have had. Americans, since the greatness of this country have arrived, have never had to worry about that. That has happened. So it is going to be a very difficult year, a year that is difficult both because of what's happening and because it's not in our nature to think about it. One more thing. You know, I have the experience again and again, and many of you may have it too, of being in a coffee shop or something. Someone I know a little bit will come up to me and say hello and then say, tell me that everything is going to be okay. And what I realize is I can't give you the assurance you want. I am not sure that everything is going to be okay, but here's what I do know. The only way that things will be okay is if we all understand how not okay they are. If we are sufficiently inflamed, we may be able to put the fire out.
Michael.
Well, I think there's a pretty much even chance that we're going to have a constitutional crisis or have a completely incompetent presidency that doesn't know how to exercise power, which is, I think, another possibility in this circumstance. He has a White House, Donald Trump has a White House, with almost no skill at governing. He has a chief of staff that's never been in government, which is absolutely extraordinary. He's elevated people, generals and corporate heads that have no experience in this extraordinarily complex business of how you put together an administration, run a bureaucracy, produce ideas. So I think there's a deep concern about the possibility of overreach, but I think we should be also concerned about the possibility of an entirely ineffective government that doesn't value governing experience, that doesn't value what government should do and what it can do under the right circumstances.
That side of the table is very depressing. I mean, don't you have any hope at all that America is somehow resilient, that the institutions will overcome whatever temporary challenges? Sorry, I'm struck by it.
But if the idea is that the structures of democracy in America, where do you think the...
I fully agree with Michele that technology and social media, these pose unique challenges to the way we communicate with each other, the way we organize democracy. But we've been in business for a long time in this country, and we've survived worse things than whatever we're facing at the moment. Keep hope alive. I don't know what the feeling is.
I am hopeful that Americans will rise to this challenge. I think the message they do not need to hear is, don't worry, your grandparents rose to the challenge, and therefore you can stay on the couch. Because you face...
I think you can tell them. You can tell them that there are past examples of bravery and fortitude and democracy.
The answer is your grandparents survived this, and you will too if you don't stay on.
But you need to take the measure. You need to take the measure of the threat to democratic institutions in this country and around the world. And I don't think we do people a service by saying, there have been bad things in the American past before. There have been. This is our bad thing, and it's about as bad a thing as has happened in any of our lifetimes.
It also concerns me. We do have this entirely new set of economic and social circumstances that the normal reaction would be to propose a politics of the future. How do we adjust? How do we prepare people for the new economy? Give them the skills and social capital they need to succeed in an entirely different world. And you look at the message of "Make America Great Again," and that is a backward-looking message. That is kind of return to social patterns and economic, approaches of the past. We can't undo globalization. That's not possible. And then you look at Hillary Clinton in this last election. She had a very backward-looking message as well. It was not the forward-looking, prepare America for opportunity, address the deepest problems of our country. So we have two parties that, in our last political experience, are not addressing the future. They're actually talking about nostalgia.
Well, and they're not in some ways addressing reality, also. I mean, in the phrase, "Make America Great Again," there's one word that if you are a person of color that you sort of stumble over, and it's the word again. Yeah. Because you're talking about going back to a time that was not very comfortable for people of color. They did not have opportunities. They were relegated to the back of the line. And this is a country that, to be honest, was built on the promise of white prosperity above everything else. And for a lot of people, when they hear that message, "Make America Great Again," deeply encoded in that message is a return to a time where white Americans can assume a certain amount of prosperity.
And that's true of gay people. It's true of women who want leadership roles in a society. There's a large group of people who are not don't like nostalgia in that sense.
Michele, did you, since the Race Card Project, you spent a lot of time looking at the conversation about race in all of its different forms in America. Did you, when you saw the racial aspects of this campaign, say, that's what I've been hearing and that's been bubbling under the surface for the last 4 years or 6 years you've been working on this, or?
More particularly in the last 2 years. I don't want to say that I told you so, but I was not as surprised by Donald Trump's victory because I saw a lot of these sentiments coming in, over the transom. A lot of people feeling a lot of vertigo in this country for a lot of reasons. Some of it is, racial fragility and not necessarily feeling like their feet touch the floor, feeling like they're not at the front of the line, but also technological disruption. Even though the economy, all these indices of the economy suggest that we're doing fine, people don't necessarily feel it. And Donald Trump was able to tap into a message where people felt a lot of discomfort. And that, again, is somewhat retrograde. I mean, fear is not our brand, in America. And that is so much the sort of the bright vein that ran
The reason
through
these things are happening,
campaign.
and not just here, but everywhere else, is, look, we've had a period of quite slow growth since the year 2000 for most people, at the same time as we have had convulsive levels of migration. Migration is one of those policies we've lost sight of what it's supposed to do. We have it whether we need it. We have it when the economy is good. We have it when the economy is bad. We have it when jobs are when jobs are looking for work. We have it when workers are looking for jobs. And it is profoundly destabilizing to people. And look at and in Europe it is connected to extraordinary physical insecurity, these levels of violence and disorder that are connected to the immigration. And so it is not, that's also not surprising.
Let me take a pause there. We'll be back with more from our panel. And we're back with our panel. David, I want to ask you, Barack Obama has been saying to Democrats who are nervous about Donald Trump, the office constrains the man. He says the White House will keep Donald Trump from doing all of the things he promised he would do in the campaign. Do you buy that theory of the presidency?
No, not at all. I'm not sure that Barack Obama would really buy it. I think it's just the sort of thing that an outgoing president says, especially to a party that feels maybe that outgoing president didn't do all that he could have or should have done to assure the preservation of his own legacy. The presidency is very powerful. It's more powerful than it used to be, and it's especially powerful when it is joined to a Congress of the same party, and a Congress that's full of people who are doubters of Donald Trump, but who have made a bargain. That there are things that they want badly to do. They look to this president to sign those things. And he's made it clear, the things you and the Republicans in Congress care about most, he will do. And all he asks in return is that they leave him alone to do the things that he cares about most. So we're going to have an agenda from Congress that is pretty unpopular in all of the country, that is able to be passed into law only because this unpopular president is there by accident to sign it, so they are dependent on him. They know if he falls, they're doomed. And he, meanwhile, has a highly individualistic agenda, I believe, that is focused mostly on self-enrichment and also self-protection against investigation of the extent of foreign involvement in his election.
I will attach myself to David's negativity in this case. The presidency is a very powerful office, and what we've seen in the run-up to inauguration is that the man has the power, just through his use of Twitter, to destabilize, among other things, the most important bilateral relationship between two countries in the world, the China-U.S. relationship. So his ability to create chaos is really quite remarkable. And one could say, yes, when you're really frightened, when the intelligence people come in and say you can't do that or this war is going to break out, well then a lot of presidents get constrained. But this is a guy so far who won't take intelligence briefings,
and
so that's problematic.
China is big and can look after itself. He also has the power to identify, hey, you, Union president in small-town America, you, everybody on Twitter, hate him and bring him death threats. And that power has been used once. I don't think
that's where
that's
the
the last
bargain
time.
may fall apart, though. You know, the grand bargain that he has allegedly struck with Republicans, because I think you may start to hear this phrase, country first. And if people are really concerned about democracy, it's a moment where people will really have to think about
a lot of Republicans
what is...
have bent in his direction, though. They have moved in his direction.
And the problem is not just a chaotic management theory. It's actually a weird cycle by which he will stay on message for 7 days. And then all of a sudden, 3 in the morning, he reads InfoWars and, sends off a tweet and goes off. And then everyone has to go to the family and say, can you get him back on the wagon? And then there's another crisis, process like this. The presidency can't work that way. You can tank markets. You can invite incursions. You can do a variety of things. And the manner in which he both manages and his lack of control, impulse control, when it comes to his own message, I don't know how that works in the presidency. It's going to be fascinating.
Well, the president, he may not change, but his responsibilities will change. And so you have someone who obviously has a certain amount of impulse control walking into an office that has great physical and mental demands. And it will be really interesting to see how the office perhaps doesn't constrain him in terms of power, but just the reality of doing that job, which is a full-time job that never ever lets
Let me
up.
give you an example of something we should all be very frightened of. And this may be the single most dangerous thing for world peace that happens. It's very bad when a president, as Barack Obama did, draws a red line and the red line isn't actually there. That's humiliating. That leads people to misunderstand. What is much more dangerous is if the president says the red line isn't there and it really is. Trump is every day signaling that red lines aren't there, that NATO doesn't matter.
Meaning that America has withdrawn within its borders.
But he is wrong about that. That there are
the Baltic states and others.
There's an American armored brigade taking up a position in Poland. There are nuclear-capable NATO armies in Estonia, and there's a nuclear-capable NATO powers are in Estonia, and there are NATO armies in Latvia and Lithuania. There's a big buildup happening in Bulgaria. You give the Russians the idea that the United States is not serious.
Look, Saddam had this in Kuwait. Saddam felt that the U.S. was signaling that it would have been okay to invade Kuwait, take it as your own. There were mistaken signals sent. Saddam went, and then there was a reaction, and we all know what the reaction was. So there is precedent in the presidency for this to happen.
You know, John, you asked Jeff, as an assignment editor, what would he be looking for? Where is he positioning people now? The questions that we're not asking. One of the big questions, I think, is in regard to our military and its capability and its footprint right now. You know, a much more hawkish administration is going in because of the conflicts that you're talking about, because of the things that we don't fully understand. I mean, one of the questions I have is, what is our military footprint going to look like? You hear generals quietly talking about a return of a draft that might include females. You know, these are the big questions that I think that need to be considered as we go into 2017.
Michael, let me ask you this question about the constraints the Republican Party could put on Donald Trump. Clearly, one of the stories of 2016 was that there were no constraints in the primary that a party could put on its nominee, and so it is now Donald Trump's party. But in Congress, Paul Ryan is one example. David makes the good point that Paul Ryan is getting a lot of what he wanted and is going to try and stick to his lane and let Donald Trump sort of exist over here. Is that the way you see it in terms of the relationship between Donald Trump and the Republican congressional leaders?
Well, in kind of the Venn diagrams, there's a middle in which they both agree, which is undoing executive orders and, you know, maybe tax reform or, you know, certainly environmental policy or other areas. So those things will get done. I mean, he has control, and the Congress will support him in those things. But you know, on items where they do not share that agenda, you know, I don't know. The president has a tremendous ability to set the priorities, the national priorities. And the problem here is, you know, I think that he is signaling an agenda: tax cuts, massive infrastructure, defense increases, balanced budget, that are completely inconsistent. There's no budget you could put together that actually includes all the priorities that he's talked about. They don't know how to put together a budget. That's going to be a fascinating initial test of whether he actually has a realistic budget.
And he has the least competent OMB director in the history of the office.
Right. So it'll be interesting whether he can lead on that or whether they're just overwhelmed by the reality of governing in a way that may empower the congressional wing of the party.
Michele, do you see in response, to big forces, there are often big opposite reaction forces? We saw to Barack Obama's election that the birther movement, Donald Trump being the leading proponent of the idea that Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Do you see that kind of shock reaction in a way that becomes formalized or that tries to match Donald Trump in the power and success that he had with his tactics?
It would probably come from the Democrats, and one of the challenges there is the Democratic Party is very complex. And it is a party of, it's truly a big tent party, and so it's unclear exactly how that will happen right now, because the Democratic Party also seems to be doing a little bit of introspection, and still, you know, we're still sort of adjudicating what happened in November of 2016 and not necessarily looking forward to what will happen. I think we're going to see that, though, and I think some of it might actually possibly come not just from the Democrats, but from Republicans. Donald Trump made a lot of promises that are going to be very difficult to deliver, and the people that he pumped up at all these rallies during his campaign, and now, you know, as he's just completing his victory tour, people have great expectations. And, you know, when you ask people to pick up their pitchforks and march behind you, if you can't deliver, those pitchforks wind up being aimed at you in the end.
There are a lot of things Donald Trump doesn't know, but he does know how to dominate, bully, and provoke. And one of his goals, I think, in 2017 will be to drive people on the left left to do self-destructive things that will damage them and empower him.
If that works, we will have no center-right party and no center-left party in America. It will be the institutionalization of an extreme
But the enormous
polarization.
assumption David is making is that the Democrats, the left, will have the discipline to respond to this.
I didn't make that assumption.
No.
And there's no incentive for the left to have
The
conflict because
implicit
everybody's
assumption
jockeying.
is that, I mean, there's no
better,
possibility.
but they
There's
won't.
no possibility that this party that has no senior leadership at the moment, that has no plausible candidate to run against Donald Trump in 4 years, it has a bunch of semi-plausible candidates.
That party's going to spill out beyond leadership. I mean, yes, there will be the Nancy Pelosi's and all of the other aged Democratic office holders, but there will be then this frenzy of activity. Occupy Wall Street, but for real and purposeful out in the streets. And the question is, will they do...
And that will lead to the crackdown.
...wise things, or will they do foolish things? Will they march with Mexican flags and burn American flags, or will they say, we are here to defend, not in an ideological way, but to defend American institutions? And that will be a test of discipline. And I am anxious as to whether people will...
Institutions. I mean, I think it's a, you know, when we're talking about protests, we have to remember that people have a right to protest. And sometimes defending American institutions is actually challenging them.
What I mean by defending American institutions is that the president shouldn't have his own private band of bodyguards. He should use the Secret Service. What I mean by defend is the president shouldn't extract bribes. What I mean by defending American institutions is the president should tell the truth. He should release his tax returns. Basic norms of how a democracy with a strong executive and weak checks on corruption, which is unfortunately something that has always been true in the United States, how it polices itself. Those are the things. I don't mean, I'm not telling anyone to be quiet. I'm telling people to understand the nature of the threat they face. And it's not because you're going to have conservative appointees to the Supreme Court. That is not, if I were a liberal and a Democrat, which I'm not, I would hope I would have the discipline to say, you know what, the Republicans, they won the election, they get to have their Supreme Court appointees. They don't get to have, however, their private presidential bodyguards. That's not okay.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and